So, when we say that modern leftism is a cult, this opinion piece from the Toronto Star is exactly what we're talking about. This exemplifies the cultish nature of modern leftism and gender theory. Here's the headline: It's a privilege, not a right, to know your kid's gender identity. So here, the headline is that as a parent, you don't have a right to know about your child's health if it falls under the purview of pseudoscientific gender gibberish. Now, sex and gender, up until seemingly 15 minutes ago, had always just been synonyms. They meant the same thing. And then we had this redefinition of gender into this abstract, unfalsifiable concept of gender, in which the word gender actually ceases to have any meaning, because it could be anything. Don't believe me? Ask the frog genders. And that's how you end up with stuff like this. And this does seem straight out of a cult, and as we go through the article, I will prove it to you. Again, let's read this headline. It's a privilege, not a right, to know your kid's gender identity. Anyway, it says, it's a hard truth that some kids live with parents who are transphobic. No province should forcibly out gender nonconforming kids to these parents. And nothing in that statement suggests that all parents should lose their rights. It starts out, my son, Zach, is transgender. He told us, nonchalantly at bedtime, 3 years ago. Because he's only 11, so far his transition has been strictly social. New pronouns, new clothes, new haircut, new name. With few exceptions, it's been as nothing burger as it sounds. It actually doesn't sound very nothing burger. Because perhaps the now 11-year-old child doesn't even understand the concept of gender, your concept of gender, and perhaps this is all completely false. Perhaps there's going to be a lifetime of psychological damage involved. And apparently, the child just told him nonchalantly at bedtime. So an 8-year-old told you at bedtime that they were born in the wrong body, and that was it. Because 8-year-olds know everything. They can map out their whole lives ahead of them. They don't even need you. What are you there for? And of course, there couldn't be any other factors involved. There couldn't be peer pressure. I mean, do you know if this was suggested to the child by a teacher, by a schoolmate? Is it something they saw on the internet? I mean, how well do you really understand what's happening here? By the time he has his first appointment at the Sick Kids Gender Clinic in August 2024, he'll be 12 and a half and will have been on the wait list for 18 months. If 4 years into his transition, he chooses gender-affirming medication, it will not be an impulsive decision. Yeah, from a 12-year-old. And again, are you sure that all of this is real? Are you sure that maybe your child hasn't gotten some actually very positive attention from all of this? Sounds like possibly the child has. Perhaps the child is being signaled, subtly or not so subtly, that this is the right thing to do, that this is what's expected of the child. Maybe people would be disappointed if it didn't happen. But oh, what am I saying? It's a 12-year-old. I mean, what don't 12-year-olds know about life? Or other things they haven't experienced, like puberty. But let's continue. As an urban, liberal, agnostic Canadian, the hardest part of parenting a trans... For one thing, you didn't need to tell us you're an urban, liberal, agnostic Canadian. You could have just said, as a parent. But anyway, the hardest part of parenting a trans kid has been watching the anti-trans groundswell, particularly in the UK and the US. Funny you should mention the UK. Have you seen this article? 1,000 families to sue Tavistock Gender Service. The UK's only children's gender identity development service, run by Tavistock and Portman NHS Foundation Trust, is to be sued by at least 1,000 families who allege that their children were rushed into taking life-changing puberty-blocking drugs. As a result, they were facing physical and psychological permanent scarring that will last the rest of these victims' lifetimes. And you see stuff like this and you think, how can these parents be so certain? Aside from the fact of just how obviously incoherent the entire gender theory movement is in the first place. As of this month, 22 U.S. states have enacted laws or policies banning gender-affirming care for youth up to the age 18, despite evidence that this does more harm than good. Well, I guess nobody told Europe about that. They were way ahead on this stuff, by the way, and now they are pulling back. European countries restrict trans healthcare for minors, citing insufficient research. European health bodies from Sweden to France are taking a more conservative approach to gender affirming care for minors. And by the way, gender affirming care is a euphemism. And, if you really think about it, it's kind of the opposite of what it actually means. I've cried often for those kids and their parents, and I've cried for fear these baseless laws will make their way north of the border. So either the person who wrote this has absolutely no idea what's happening around this issue and the pseudoscience behind it, or they just don't care. I mean, I've cried often for those kids. Well, have you cried for these people? Detransitioner sues clinic for mutilating his body. Detransitioner sues doctors after being given irreversible gender treatments as a child. And this is Chloe Cole. She was transitioned in her early teens, given testosterone, a double mastectomy at 15. Her parents were told that she'd kill herself if they didn't allow this to happen. Now, are you sure that your 8-year-old really knows what they're talking about? Here, Ontario detransitioner who had breasts and womb removed sues doctors. And this is an adult who was scammed into this, never mind a kid. Lawyer for detransitioning woman, 18, who had surgery aged 13, slams doctors at Kaiser Permanente and says kids should be informed they could outgrow their gender dysphoria, which without intervention is what happens to the vast majority. And many of them just grow up to be gay and still have normally developed healthy bodies. And there are many, many stories like this, and there are going to be a hell of a lot more. Maybe this will be one of them. Anyway, and now it begins. In the conservative provinces of New Brunswick and Saskatchewan, parental consent is now required before a student under 16 can use their preferred pronouns or name at school. So that just simply means that the school can't hide crucial information about your child's health from you. That's it. That is what is so terrifying to the author of this column. In my own province of Ontario, the education minister has opened the door to similar policies here, saying, quote, parents must be fully involved and fully aware of what's happening in the life of their children so that they can support their kids. On the surface, I couldn't agree more. This has been my experience, after all. Because Zach trusted us enough to share his gender identity with us, my husband and I have been fully involved, fully aware, and fully supportive. And again, I just have to bring up the word cult. Because Zach trusted us enough to share his gender identity with us, do you see here how the responsibility is completely abrogated to a child, to, at the time of the so-called transition, 8 years old? I mean, everything in this opinion piece is the opposite of sanity. We were the ones, not Zach, to have the conversations with the school about changing his pronouns and name. Not because it was our right to do so, as the education minister suggests, but because we earned the privilege of Zach's true self. Again, they've completely abrogated their responsibility as parents to a child. In what other way would you do this? Would you let your 8-year-old drive your car? Would you let your 8-year-old decide what everybody's going to eat for every meal? If your 8-year-old asks you to get him an Uber downtown at 2 o'clock on a Saturday night, are you going to do that? No, probably not. And I would say even that would be less reckless than this. And what is so genuinely shocking here is that there's just no doubt whatsoever Zach's true self. As if you can possibly know that. The child isn't going to know that until they're an adult. Again, cult. The word cult that describes this. If you truly are the sort of parent to support your kid's gender identity, you don't need a policy to codify your right to do so. You simply need to be open, kind, caring, and create a safe space for your kid to be themselves. See, I just feel like there's a lot of people that would have a different definition of these words: kind, caring, safe space. But anyway, if you do that, they'll share their gender identity with you before they share it with their school. For one thing, that's just a nonsense statement. You have no idea. You have no idea what's happening at the school. You have no idea if the child is being groomed by a teacher, by a counselor. You have no idea of what kind of peer pressure is going on. Now, this last part is very revealing into the psychology behind this column, and it almost kind of feels like this is really more about the person writing this and their virtue than the child, even, perhaps. But not everyone is that sort of parent, so those of us who are need to band together to make sure that the most important rights in this discussion, the rights of children to freely express their gender, are upheld and uplifted. See what I mean? It feels a bit like one factor in this, in any case, is that the person who wrote this column likes being the person who wrote this column. But I think we'll sum this up with this statement that the rights of children to freely express their gender, this is a total abrogation of the parent's responsibility to protect their child. Protect them from what? From themselves, obviously, but also from obviously politically motivated pseudoscientific gibberish that can leave them chemically castrated and mutilated, all before they can possibly give informed consent for any of this, and before they even genuinely know who they are. Anyway, that's all I got to say about that. Please subscribe, like, and share. Sharing really helps me out. I thank you for that. I will see you next time.